Hi, and welcome to the third session, the SEO video podcast that tries to bring you and forward in the next and coming future of SEO. So to build up your strategy or simply to discover things that you were already knowing, but weren't able to put, fix, and clear in your mind. Today, we are going to have a wonderful guest. I mean, all our guests are wonderful, but this one is specifically wonderful. You know it, surely, because it works many years at Yoast, a guy obsessed with technical SEO, especially with speed and everything on the edge, everything really, not the classic things that you have to fix. But he also has a very brilliant mind in designing and thinking forward in terms of where search is going. And we are going to talk with Jono Alderson. How are you
There he
doing?
is. I'm great. Thank you for having me, and what a lovely intro. Very nice.
Well, you don't deserve less.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you don't deserve it, which would have been possibly a
Well,
great
I
start.
mean,
Yeah,
if you want, I can say that too. So,
I
I
know.
mean,
No, thank you.
how SEO is treating you nowadays?
Oh, big opening question. That's interesting, isn't it? I think it's the same as it's always been, but more different than ever. Wow, that's cliche, isn't it? I think a lot of the tactical stuff that used to occupy a lot of everyone's time no longer applies and is drying up. And I think more and more what we're left with is either brand strategy, for want of a better phrase, or technical quality, or PR. I think that, yeah, and maybe those are different disciplines. Maybe that's what SEO always was, and we just were distracted by guest commenting and link building, and now that's gone away a little bit. Maybe what's left is actually the thing. But yeah, I think it's super interesting. I know it continues to evolve and change, which is super exciting. I think, as you said, I'm still obsessed with technical SEO. I think so many brands and sites have slept on this, and they have terrible websites that deliver terrible user experiences. They might even be doing a really good job in areas like content and reputation and PR and stuff, but their houses are on fire and the landscape is a barren dystopian hell. So yeah, it's a super interesting time to be going. Maybe we should make these websites are the medium through which we do SEO, right? And which users interact with the web. Maybe we should invest in their quality a little bit. And people are starting to think about that now, which is really cool.
Oh, yes, maybe it's more. I I like to think it as it was some sort of back to the future in the sense when everything started many years ago and we were younger with more hairs.
Yeah, much.
It was, I mean, we didn't care. We did a really awful website because we were graphically awful site on GeoCity, for instance, but we were writing out of passion. We weren't thinking of these things. Oh, I have to put this keyword, I have to do these things, I have to write 15,000 blog posts because if not, I'm going to be, content decay, blah, 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 blah. So
Yep.
all these kind of things. And somehow it's the evolution of search, willing or not, is pushing us. It's pushing us to reconsider what we were doing. And for us, of the older generation, let's say, we cannot deny that we are the older generation of SEO. This is something that we can relate. Maybe it's more difficult for the younger generation, or let's say the millennial of SEO, the ones who started with SEO already somehow established with some rules, with some good practice that now are not so good. So for them, maybe it's harder
Yeah,
to
I think you're absolutely right. I think the journey through GeoCities and through the birth of the web and learning and cutting our teeth at a time when there weren't any rules, when the web was much less commercialized and much less mechanized, I think taught us to think from first principles and to be curious and to question things and to experiment. And like, I fell in love with CSS. I had to learn to do MySQL stuff with databases. I had to learn how clients, and all of these things, you needed to be good at all of it in order to be successful. We use the term webmaster, which is now problematic for many good reasons. I don't think there's a good word that replaces it, but that concept, I think a lot of us were and then kind of evolved into it. I don't think that journey happens anymore. I think a lot of designers learn design and become designers, developers learn to develop and become developers, right? I don't think there are many paths now where people go through that journey and become curious and learn about all the things. That said, maybe AI is changing some of that. Maybe you don't need to go quite so deep in those areas. Maybe you can backfill for those skills to ChatGPT and LLMs and stuff. So yeah, the next generation, I think, will be super interesting.
Indeed. When you were talking, I was visualizing in my mind to the classic, what is called the T-shaped. This was for very long the paradigm. So you have to know something of the other things and then really super specialize.
And I never have called that out, right? That's a problem because it's not good enough, right? Was it the
No,
pie-shaped mark?
in fact, I want to, because I know you were present already 80 years ago when it was the Vein Boulder in London.
Yeah.
And I presented my idea that maybe the model should be the P in the sense of the classic
I really like
Greek letter P model. So, okay, it's fine. You can't know everything. So you have to have at least a basic knowledge of all the fields that are surrounding the marketing of a website. But then you have to okay, you are an SEO, so you have to specialize in your field of SEO. But then you also have to specialize to really know well what is other things that support and that SEO can support. Like in this case could be branding, in another case could be content, not said as content marketing, but said as content by itself.
Yeah, a designer who can also write, or a developer who's also an expert in security, or a lawyer who's also great with databases, right? Those are the golden people and the golden skill sets, definitely.
Yes, because I think that there is a lot of, maybe not now less, because, now SEO, and especially the AI bros side of SEO, are really trying to win the talk, saying, no, SEO is not dead, it's transforming GEO, LLM, AOs. I have not enough space in my mouth to pronounce these acronyms. And because, using AI as a tool, you can have a competitive advantage, which is correct. But it's not really solving the problem of how SEO can be maintain relevant to the business company. So how can you sell SEO in this new, if you don't have, yes, a wonderful knowledge of what's happening in search, and how search is evolving, but also how this change, so the 2P, the two part of the P, can support brand, can support messaging, can support, for instance, in relation with international SEO, audience analysis, expansion in new markets, etc., etc., etc. How would you define this? What would you suggest to this, we call it younger generation of SEO, in order to not get stuck into the AI frenzy world and really becoming something a better SEO? So neither stuck in the old definition.
So I think the thing everybody seems to forget, or at least to gloss over, is there are 1,000 other people who look just like you, who have exactly the same job as you, doing the same keyword research as you with the same tools, producing the same spreadsheet, and commissioning or writing, God forbid, the same articles on the same crappy website. The AI revolution and all of this incredible tooling, yes, can upskill us, yes, can support us, yes, can make us go faster, yes, but is used in the same way by the same people. So all that really happens is that kind of aggregate volume of stuff increases and it all goes faster, but there's no, or at least not commensurably increased amounts of creation of new value, at least not other than by chance and just by sheer volume, right? So I think that's the thing that we really need to train ourselves as an industry to consider is if you assume everything is becoming more and more commoditized, which seems to be true, and the cost of entry to disrupt a market gets lower and lower, the only thing that really differentiates, do I spend as a consumer my money with brand A or brand B, is what do they truly do differently? What is their story? What do they believe in? How are they differentiated? And these historically and traditionally SEO questions, right? We do the very last bit, which is paint the pig. We don't ask about how is it reared and what's its quality of life. And it's very rare for an SEO to be involved in the product design process or to have an opinion on pricing and positioning and marketplace and all of those things. But that's where the influential discussions need to happen, because otherwise you get left with a crappy website promoting a crappy product with, I don't know, 100,000 GPT written articles, but none of them say anything because the heart of the thing isn't inherently good or better or different from the rest of the market. So I think certainly the old school SEOs and the new SEOs need to retrain themselves to think about how do I get much closer to materially impacting our relevance. And I really like Mike King's take on this. I disagree with him on some stuff, but I love his positioning of the phrase relevant, the word relevance to describe what this is, right? This is relevance engineering. This another RE is another acronym, right? But the idea that the better version of SEO, or at least a better way of describing what good and effective SEO looks like, is to go into the organization and say, how do I help make our content, our results, our proposition, our product more relevant to a given search in a given context with your given market, yada, yada. That's a much harder question, right? Because it does touch on what is the quality of our packaging and is the pricing right? And what happens if we're not open on Tuesdays, but that's when people want this service? And do we need to change our physical location? And what do we do about the fact that the CEO has a bad reputation? Suddenly, all of these things do affect how relevant your website, your content, your product is for a search. And that's where we need to be playing. That's where we need to be engineering. I think you can still call that SEO. I don't think we need many new acronyms for it. I think the market will still ask for SEO, but I think the good version of executing that looks much more sophisticated and grown up than it has to date. That's quite exciting. I like.
Yeah, that's why maybe we talk of in-house SEO, the in-house SEO should pretend always to be in the meeting, even if they may not sound so sexy in the sense, this company meeting about positioning, about branding, about business, especially the higher you are in your SEO position, and maybe talking of in agency and even more consultant like we are. Maybe not only asking what is the technical stack of your website, but also is maybe even more asking what is your business about? What is your history as a business?
Yeah.
What are your perceived competitors, not your organic, only your organic competitor? Another question, like, I don't know, what are your business objectives? I don't care that I don't want you to tell me I want to multiply my search organic click
Just need
what
more revenue. Of
100%.
course it
This
is.
is something that I can tell you, but I need to know what is your growth that you are forecasting you want to fulfill.
And
And
so many businesses will struggle with this, right? Because they won't have a good answer because they aren't differentiated and they aren't inherently good or better than competitors in different ways because historically they've not needed to be. Like you can spin up a bakery on a busy high street and you will sell some cupcakes until the world changes and competition increases and omniscient AIs start taking over and declaring what good and bad looks like. And yeah, which is the world we're experiencing now online and in the search results. And suddenly there is no guarantee of success and there is no guarantee of access to the market. And so many businesses in the real world would compete on we happen to be in the right place at the right time with the right price point with a reasonably comfortable looking logo and inoffensive mission statement. And that's not going to be enough. Certainly not to compete when there is only one winner, or like maybe at best these ChatGPT and Google recommend maybe 2 or 3 alternatives. But the agency of the user to go through and cherry pick from a list of 10 results and to do their own research, going to go away and going to continue to diminish. And these systems are going to pick the best, the most differentiated, the cheapest, the closest, the fastest, the most interesting, the most meaningful, whatever. And if you're the eighth in whatever of those categories, you're not going to show up. So yeah, those hard conversations where you go in as a much more consultative role, whether you're in-house or whether you're in agency, and say, you've asked me to do keyword research and tweak our page titles and fix our 404s. But our bigger question that we really need to ask is, why should people choose to buy from us other than just price or availability? Or unless you can choose just to compete on price and availability, but then you are right up against Amazon and increasingly Google and Temu and whoever else, right? So strategically, many organizations are probably going to want to bet on, we should have some kind of differentiated value proposition. I think there's years of hard conversations to be had, saying we've got away without really having this to date. Now we need to nail it. And then that echoes to organizational policy, content strategy, hiring, how you train your call center. What is your returns policy? All of these things become the fields in which SEO competes in against competitors. I think that's challenging, but super exciting because it's meaningful. It's far more meaningful than, yeah, we published an article and we got 6 links from some awful pyramid scheme. It's a much nicer thing to be doing, right? You're impacting the world in more meaningful ways.
Yeah, sure. It is more interesting, as I say, to friends and clients too. Sure, it is more exciting when talking about how to optimize a title tag. I mean, I didn't spend almost 15 years of studies and more 20 years in SEO to still talking about where you have to put the keyword in the title tag.
Yeah.
And sincerely, I think that maybe this not being able to stand out, not being able to put in the right relevance what business can offer to the public. I always thought that it's strongly biased by how, for instance, many in our industry do, for instance, keyword research. Because usually keyword research is starting with the keyword gap. So what are the keywords for which our competitors are ranking well and not us? And so this lead to some sort of loop where you are looking for this keyword. Okay, these websites are ranking well because they are doing these things and these other things, which could lead also to the famous skyscraper technique in terms of creating content, which is substantially copying what others do and trying to do it bigger. And
which nobody ever did, right? Nobody ever actually improved the thing. I like that.
And instead, I think that the winning website are those that do this competitive research. Obviously, it must be done to see where the other websites are standing, and then going and see why, not because they do this thing and this, but the real reason why, what differentiate them one each other, all of them, and then saying, okay, what can I do to be visible for this particular query set that nobody else is doing? Because it's so yes, it's harder. Maybe in this case, it's not so hard for me because of my many years in the media, in television. So we really needed to, okay, these other television are doing all these series. What can we broadcast in order to be a unique voice at different voices? So we started to buy TV rights for The Office, for Sex and the City, for Father Ted, for all these not very well-known series from US in the UK, in Italy, that came immediately. We were really maybe smaller audience, but really a fanatic one. And so this should be maybe one of the things. Then obviously all the other things that you were saying, it's funny that you were telling the returning policy, for instance, in e-commerce. And I mean, it's your Google merchant maybe doesn't deserve the outstanding merchant label from Google, which is a huge ranking factor for Google Shopping and Google Merchant, because maybe your return policy is crap or because it's not well written, so Google is not accepting it. So this is a really good example.
Yeah, and even more kind of viscerally, you've got a bad returns policy. Now there's a whole bunch of people on Reddit complaining about your brand. Like, okay, so when somebody Googles your brand, that's going to rank in position number 2 or 3, and it's going to be highly visible there. And it's definitely going to influence whether or not people click your result, even if you're on number 1. And even if they do click it, they're going to go in with the expectations that there's a reputational issue, and they're going to be nervous about purchasing, and they're maybe going to sit and maybe they get biased with that. Like, all of these things happen. But the inverse, you deliver a great experience and great returns policy. You make a whole bunch of brand evangelists who then celebrate you on Reddit, and you build and foster a community where you're loved and respected and known for yada, yada, yada. People tweet, people retweet. People are more likely to endorse, to link, to cite, to recommend. All of these things add up. And all of these, is this SEO? Maybe in a world where just explicit links are less important than mentions and references and things that are links, then all of these things become super valuable. This is the currency. Going from we have a terrible returns policy to actually we surprise and delight our customers and our audiences becomes transformative, and probably is far more effective than going, we're going to make these tweaks on the website, we're going to publish this content, because you're changing people's behavior. And the way they interact with your brand in a way that leaves breadcrumbs and signals that search engines and LLMs can understand. Those retweets, those comments, those Reddit posts, etc., are fuel for their understanding of, is this a good fit for a given search, etc. So yeah, that's probably a much more sensible place to spend time and resources than conventional SEO. You mentioned inventory as well, right? The idea that you can, okay, we differentiate. Maybe we should tell different things. Maybe we should get different things in. Maybe we should stop selling those things. I think it's rare to see SEOs saying, okay, we have these 28 categories on our e-commerce site. Maybe we should, as a business, stop selling these 5 so that we can focus on these ones instead. Or maybe there's value in us diversifying into this related area, because it turns out people who want these things and trust our brand might also benefit from these things. And we've done all this keyword research, which maybe the rest of the organization isn't educated enough to do very well. Maybe you can spot opportunities and then ways to make more revenue to your customers that generates those behavioral changes that influences the Googles, the ChatGPTs, etc. I think all of this is SEO. I think it's always been SEO. We've just been lazy and distracted. And to your point also on the idea that people kind of kick off engagements and they say, right, we're going to do some keyword research. They also say, right, we're going to make technical tweaks to your website and we're going to go try and get some links. We have created those perceptions and constraints. We've defined what SEO is and how it's sold. There's nothing stopping us the next time there's a pitch for a client as an agency or a change in stuff internally in-house, that when they say, could I have one SEO, please? We go, great, yes, I will need to speak to the team who are in charge of the training budget for the customer support people. I will need to talk to the catering department about our reputation. There is nothing that stops us other than that kind of continual momentum from defining the scope of where we can play and have this kind of influence. It's a hard conversation to have, but the longer we don't have it for, the harder it becomes. I think that's gonna be really what differentiates the winners from the losers. Who and where we're able to have those conversations with.
Yes, because I think that we have our competitive advantage with respect to other marketers is, for instance, social media marketers. They have the pulse of the moment. What's happening now? But
Yep.
what we know is maybe not only what's happening in the moment, but what's it going to happen in the future. And we know we are custodians of how people search in the past. So we know all the story of the journeys that people have done in the past, now, and that probably we are going to do in the future. That's why it's really our competitive advantage as an industry, as SEO. And I think that journey is the keyword that is really important now, because we know that the journey 2018, I don't want to say it again, Ben Bounder, but 2018, Ryan Fishkin at Ben Bounder in Madrid started to talk for the first time of a zero-click SERP. And that is a phenomenon that is now is so common that it's not even cited anymore.
Yes, zero-click everything.
It's the normal. And it's not just that. So journey, you cannot think to rank and receive a click just because you rank. You have to be visible to rank for being visible, and hopefully knowing the journey, being visible all along the journey. So finally, people can eventually rediscover you, not on Google, but maybe going on ChatGPT and asking a very long conversational query about something and you are popping up also on ChatGPT, and then boom, the bulbs light and they start searching for you again, deeper and deeper, and maybe return with a direct traffic directly typing your website. And this is where the difference of SEO as a search journey to SEO as a search engine optimization in the past. And I think that this is something that a few weeks ago, I has been published conversation I had with Amanda Natividad of Sparktoro. And she is very well known for having coined the zero-click marketing. And maybe this is a good way where we can also find a point of connection, because the classic problem of us SEO is always being sometimes consciously isolated from the other type of marketer. If this is a good way for, okay, you know what? I want to be more visible, as you were saying, on LLMs. So can you try to create content which is not pushing the link, apart that now usually we must put it in the first comment in the first answer. So marketing our brand, our values, our value proposition whatsoever in your LinkedIn posts, threads, whatsoever, even TikTok videos, so that this exposition is going to influence the mind of our audience and make us remembered, and so also be remembered, because LLMs are like, the cookie monster. They eat everything. Because they eat everything from for training themselves, they are going to speed up as in the response that they are offering, obviously. In this sense, we can create this kind of connection that before were quite hard to create, also because we cannot deny SEO are snobbish.
Yeah. And I think now is a really good time to eat some humble pie, because other channels, like all brand marketing, have always understood this. And there's a really strong argument now, I think, that we've miscategorized and mistreated SEO as a performance channel historically, because we could just about wrangle the machine in a way that predictably meant if we spend this budget and research these keywords and publish this content and buy these links, then we can get this many visits and some proportion of them will convert. And that meant that the whole conversation was always about, how do I rank first? How do I get my website to rank first for this keyword so that when people search it, we maximize the efficiency of that machine? And I think that machine is now broken. Like zero-click searches was the start of it. I think this evolution to agentic search data is the next big chapter, whatever format it lands in. I think the idea is that people search, they click your website and they buy a thing. It's not really how people behave anymore, and certainly won't be in the future, as you say. And I think when you look at how other channels or brands have behaved, they've gone, okay, we're going to spend a bunch of money on TV adverts and billboard advertising and radio, because we know that when people are exposed to our brand messaging for a number of times, a number of places, and a number of scenarios, we increase the propensity that they recognize our logo or trust our jingle, or when presented with a set of 5 competitive alternatives, will prefer ours because it feels more comfortable. This is science. This is well understood human psychology. Advertising works, and advertising that doesn't necessarily need to drive direct response. I think there still is a place for direct response, but I don't think SEO is largely it. I think I've been talking about this for what feels like 100 years. There's a better flavor of SEO, which incorporates some of this thinking, where you go, when somebody is searching in our problem space, the thing that they see and click in the search results isn't our brand. We don't know first. But the thing that they see, that they may be clicking position 3 or maybe even position 1, it doesn't matter. It's a review from a trusted expert in that space that says we're great. Or it's our YouTube channel. Or it's an interview with our CEO on LinkedIn Pulse. All of these things are good, because that user who is on a journey, who isn't making a decision in the snap of the moment, who's evaluating options, who is damn well visiting the websites of our competitors and assessing differences and performing gap analysis, even if it's just a subconscious thing, the things that they have exposed to and experience and see and read influence what happens next on that journey. And I think in particular influences which brands they discount from their consideration sets. So if we do that humble pie and become a bit less snobbish, and we look at the tactics that other channels have used, which is, hey, let's help people. let's tell stories, let's be relatable, let's be differentiated, let's make some noise, let's stand out, let's draw some attention. All of those things aren't just designed to say, how do we get a link so we drive our rankings for this keyword so people click our thing and buy our thing? Then we start to unlock a whole bunch of much more strategic options and thinking, which not only influence how customers perceive our brand and make decisions on that journey, but is exactly the kind of thing that the LLMs are eating, right? We are influencing how they understand our stuff, because very much from the SparkToro ideology, if we are engaging and producing content and having conversations in the kinds of places that our customers are, then that becomes very apparent to a ChatGPT or an Anthropic or whatever, as they are consuming the web and internalizing this kind of understanding, for want of a better phrase, of the psyche and needs and wants and behaviors of these audiences. Then all of those signals and all of that advertising and all of that branding that isn't just how do I make keywords better is what influences whether you show up in that and how you get talked about. And actually, the best kind of SEO then just becomes branding. And yet again, there is a space for direct response and stuff at the bottom of the funnel and direct keywords and worrying about where we rank, but that becomes tactical in the grand scheme of things compared to the bigger picture, I think.
Yes. And changing slightly, but not so slightly. I have one question. In one of your decks, your latest presentation, one night WordCamp, you were talking about AAT. It's maybe because SEO has mistakenly understood. I mean, is AAT substantially Google telling everything you just said, but in a very bad way, because Google is not able to communicate almost anything?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
But because us SEO always wear this thin ad foil when Google talks,
How do I reverse engineer this? This into a checklist.
we started to think, no, that means that there is an authorship ranking factor.
Yes.
Is maybe sometimes SEO simpler at the end of the day than somebody tried to paint it?
Oh, definitely right. I think it's still hard. I think I think you're exactly right. I think if you look at the EEAT guidelines as a good example, Google are consistently terrible at getting the tone of this kind of communication right, because they know full well that the tactical response from SEOs will be, how do I mechanize this? And that's understandable for a whole bunch of reasons. They do a poor job of anticipating that and incorporating that mindset into how they present this. I think they could just as easily continue to say, create good content, it's not particularly helpful, but truly that is the answer, right? Create helpful content. And everything else is just essentially a subset of that. Be a trustworthy brand, have authorship, etc. None of these things are ranking factors or checkboxes that we need necessarily, or they're things we should consider, but they're just hallmarks of being a trustworthy brand that provides helpful content. I think Danny gets a lot of stick for sticking to that phrase, but so much of it does come back to that. And it is simple and it's simplistic and it's extremely hard, which is why people don't like it. Like, businesses are not generally, at least any business that was established other than in the immediate short term, businesses are generally not designed to produce helpful content. Businesses are designed to attract or trick you into coming to their website or into their store so that they can control the narrative and the experience you have so that they can try and close a sale. None of those models account for the idea that now, in order to reach and influence an audience, you first need to have proven to an omniscient God not just your product and service, but your whole proposition and the experience people have when they're engaging with it is not just a good fit for that audience, but also helps them self-serve and solve their problems in a way that mean they might therefore never buy from you. And also all of this has to be done quite significantly before the point of purchase. And this is a radical departure from how most businesses operate. And it's a huge ask when it comes to resourcing and structure. Like, how many plumbers spend half of their time producing incredibly useful educational video content in order to help people fix the problems that they have with their boilers themselves? Because if you want to rank first and influence the LLMs and beat Google as a plumber, that's what you have to do. independently of and in addition to also being a great plumber and having a great product and the right price and proposition, etc. Businesses are not designed to do this, which I think gives us an interesting pivot point now in the whole future of where to discover, because established legacy large businesses can continue to trade on existing brand equity and advocacy, but they will struggle to adapt to this new real. A lot of what the SEO industry does, I think, is try and force businesses to adapt to this reality, to say, please produce some helpful content. And it is difficult, but the small agile startups who don't yet have a brand and maybe haven't established the trust can do this. They can maybe define business models or at least pivot quickly and experiment in ways that do incorporate this, in ways that do create virtuous circles around their content and their marketing, etc. I think this is a profoundly interesting moment in the course of like the whole of capitalism, because we do get that split in either established big brands or disruptive startups. And we see evidence of this happening. All of the subscription model revolutions, all of the Gen Z TikTok e-commerce site, all of these successful disruptive businesses are based on the premise of being personalized and helpful and useful and friendly in ways that historical businesses aren't, but not because they can't be, but because they've never had to be. And it's a huge change. So maybe the next generation of SEOs does what the kind of digital transformation generation did in the year 2000-ish, and now does brand transformation in a way that makes brands helpful. So yeah, I think Google has done a bad job of explaining all of that. As of why, because it's a huge, profound change. But that's, I think, what they're trying to get at. And I think they're right. I think EAT does look like it services Google, and it's a bit trite, but I think it's the right direction. It's the right answer.
Yes, and I think, and I give it also as a tip to our listener and people watching us, maybe less stress out on search liaison and go read the Google official blog, the blog where Google is talking to businesses, not to developers, because Google considers us developers. Never created something like SEO.google.com. It's developer. Everything for us is developer, and usually is pushed over the technical side of things and not really on the content side. But if you want to understand what Google really suggests and how and where Google usually speaks well, really clear, is in the official Google blog to businesses. So that's why I really suggest you to subscribe to that blog, so you see all this information. It's there where Google many years ago talked about micro moments. It's there where Google talked about the messy middle. And now, all of a sudden, one SEO came out and said, hey, there is something called the messy middle. I discovered it.
I have a print off somewhere of the messy middle. I think it was such a great moment, and I don't know where it is, but there's a new chapter of that coming soon. I think I might already have landed, because the messy middle was, I think, ironically, the second chapter of 3. And there's another one coming. I'll go find it if it's already landed. But yeah, I thought that was a really good articulation of the complexity of those journeys, right? And that it's not just about rank first, get the click. It's about influence subtly, quite often, across multiple properties, of which your website might only be one, might be none, might be TikTok, that nudge across those journeys and hope that you push that person out towards your website eventually. Yeah, I think it's a really grown-up way of looking at it.
Yeah. And when we talk about experience, another thing that I believe, experience literally in the terms of EAT is you should have a direct experience, which is very hard because, I can be a business, but maybe I don't have direct experience of everything I sell. If you are a relatively small business, you can do it. You were doing the example of the plumbers, the one that maybe get viral also on TikToks with their story about, I cleaned up these things, horrible, I did it, bad. But maybe Google pretends that also a big chain of plumbers, a big enterprise chain of plumbers, a hypothetical one, would ask to all the plumbers to do TikTok videos and put on. This is impossible. But yes, what an SEO can do is, I can do the heavy lift part of when we are creating content and a strategy. I don't pretend, let's say, an engineer to write something for me. I will have we will have a specialized technical writer who knows the things, but don't have obviously the experience. But the engineer should dedicate at least 1 hour of a week, paid by the SEO budget of the company.
Nice. I like it.
To overview what we are creating with correct amount of time, because an engineer can take ages for considering even one article. I'm saying it from direct experience. And so
I
if
like
you,
that a lot.
so because so you is not faking it. You're not faking it because it's like when something that was already tested in the medical space, when you have a content writer, a technical content writer specializing in health, and this article has been overviewed by, yes, many times this article has been overviewed was just a fake thing in many websites. We must also be honest. But if you are honest with yourself and with what you want to serve to the public, that thing is going to work well. And another thing is that I'm going to your more techie part, the techie side.
Nice.
I think that sometimes experience, because if we go to the official definition of AT, when Google talks about experience, it's not just about personal experience of something. It talks about experience that you can read, I think also explicitly written, that is the experience on the website.
Yep. Which is always bad because they're all awful.
That's why I'm coming to you, and I was coming to your more nerdy side of Jono. So there is a lot of talks about the evolution of search, the evolution of AI, but sometimes it is passing through under the radar the huge evolution of the technical part of SEO. You are a really strong advocate of everything on the edge, really strong advocate of brands in that field like Cloudflare. And just very quickly, what do you think are the most interesting news in this field, and what do you see that is going to be the next future on the technical side of SEO?
Nice. Okay. A few interesting things. One is everybody hates JavaScript-based single-page applications, right? React is a incredible toolkit for building complex stateful applications. It is a terrible thing for building websites. And around 2010, when Angular originally launched, suddenly this pivot happened in the web ecosystem where a whole bunch of people who were application and software developers had a framework that they can now use for developing stuff on the web. And we stopped calling things websites, and we started calling things apps, and we stopped using PHP and server-side logic, and we started building nasty things in React. And the web as a whole has got slow and fugly and awful as a result. And part of the motivation for that is at some point in the design process, the CMO says these fateful words. He says, make it feel like an app, because we've been spoiled by our phones and the app ecosystem that everything is fluid and page transitions are seamless and everything is nice and buttons react, etc. And the web, you click on things and it's clunky and it's slow. And then as a result of that, a whole scenario cascades where we hire JavaScript developers instead of PHP developers and we build SPA monstrosities. I think that is the bane of most of the SEO consultancy and I know many of the people do, is trying to unpick the monstrous soups that get built as a result of that ecosystem. I think that now maybe stops. So one of the interesting things that's happening in the web standard space is we just got reasonable support for the CSS View Transitions API, which lets you, with native CSS and just a tiny bit of JavaScript, do those kind of seamless page transitions. So when you click on a button or a link in the navigation, you can have the whole thing rotate and fade out and slide stuff in and pull stuff out in a way that an app would, without needing to have had built a monstrous.
Yeah, the classic, old, very, very old diatribe and litigation with the developers when, just a tiny example, but really good example, I think. When you please don't do the main navigation with jQuery, but do it with CSS.
Yeah, every single time. Yeah, and it's become the go-to toolkit because it's the wrong people have been hired to do the wrong job in the wrong way. But the root of that problem is so deep and so endemic in the web now, that's become the norm. So yeah, the idea that we maybe push back a bit against that and say, one of the last good reasons for building your marketing portfolio website in 20 megabytes of unnecessary JavaScript, now maybe the last good reason for that is gone, and you can do a lot of that natively. So that's pretty cool. Other cool, interesting stuff. Speculation rules I'm talking a lot about. It's Chrome, they're increasingly available elsewhere, web standard for preloading the next page as the user moves their mouse over the link. And we've had stuff that's done this for a while, but you've had to run third-party JavaScript and add-ons and plugins and stuff. Now this is browser native. It's super, super good as a hack for Core Web Vitals, because Core Web Vitals is measuring the performance of a page as the user experiences it. So if the user goes to move their mouse over a link, and then speculation rules means that link is automatically loading in the background, so by the time they remove their finger, it's already loaded, then you pass all your Core Web Vitals, because the user experience for that page was lightning fast, even if it took a moment to load in reality in the background. The reason this is particularly nice is it's like 6 lines of code that you can copy paste into your site, and it just works. You can customize the heck out of it and nibble with the features and tinker with it. But the basic version of it is super easy. It's also interesting because Google have started using it on the search results. So I think the first 3 results in a conventional set and maybe other bits start loading automatically before you click them. So there's a whole bunch of kind of passive speeding up of the web going on, which is really super exciting. What else? What else is cool? Tech SEO stuff. You mentioned Edge. There's a whole bunch of interesting stuff happening in Edge. I think one of the other models of how stuff gets built that's maybe under threat is the idea that you need a server somewhere paid for by in a hosting company's data center somewhere that's manned by people with beards, and it all goes brrr, and it's all very terrifying. There's lots of cables. And then somewhere your website lives on that. I think a lot of that might be changing. I think particularly in the last few weeks, I'm looking at the stuff that Cloudflare, and to a lesser degree, Fastly and Akamai and Amazon are doing. But there's a whole revolution happening in the mechanics of how websites get served to users. So instead of typing in a URL, it hitting the server somewhere in a hosting company, and then returning the page, increasingly it's hitting somewhere on the edge. So I know that Cloudflare has a site in Manchester, which is about 2 hours from me. So when I type in my website, a copy of it gets served to that, which means it's lightning fast. All of it loads pretty much instantly. And there's a whole bunch of security and accessibility and performance upgrades that happen whilst it's in transit and in that transformation process, in a way that means I don't need conventional web hosting. I don't need to pay a hosting company for a weary server in a room full of wires and men with beards. My website kind of is ephemeral and distributed. This is very much the kind of dream we were promised of the cloud like 30 years ago, but now I think the reality, and now increasingly stuff on the web can be distributed and ephemeral. That has, there's a whole bunch of technical implications, but I think the business implication is all of this gets much cheaper, it gets much faster, and it becomes much, much easier to do things like, say, let's run an A/B test, but let's only run it if it's raining where the user is. Or let's conditionally redirect users who have added something to their cart, but only if it's a Wednesday, and only if they are in Germany, and only if they've seen our About Us page. That kind of logic gets far easier to run on the edge in these edge locations, rather than having to code that sort of stuff into your application that lives on your server that sits in the hosting company. All of this becomes much more responsive and reactive and flexible. I think that's super cool. And we're really only at the beginning of how that evolution unfolds. There's so much shiny new kit. Now you can host entire databases in edge centers. Now you can do clever stuff with images. Now you can do clever stuff with analytics. All of that can just exist on the fly, which is pretty cool.
So substantially, really, the technical side is becoming freeing us. I mean,
Yes,
maybe
very
there
much.
is going to be a steeper edge than just knowing a code, a language, or some good practices. A steeper edge. So maybe somehow the figure of a technical SEO is going to become a very specialized, maybe only technical SEO, working with another SEO, which is maybe more related to content and everything like this, obviously working together because they must coordinate.
Yeah.
And I think that the future that is going to come is, okay, technical SEO is going to be maybe more complicated, but it's going to make your life easier on the creative side, because it will allow you to do more things, but now you really maybe you wouldn't taken too much time to be justifiable for a business to do.
Yeah, definitely. And that's quite often how I end up working. I will work with somebody who's good on content strategy and understanding audiences and working out what we should publish where, in what order, and how we might promote that, etc. Whilst I will go in and tinker with HTTP headers and rewrites on the edge, etc. And there's a really nice kind of middle ground, right? You want both sides of that team to understand the bigger picture for sure. But I think as technical SEO, as you say, it gets bigger and it gets wider. It now encompasses performance and accessibility and security and network stuff to a degree. To never mind service workers and PWAs and all these other moving parts. Yeah, I think it becomes quite a deep specialty. That said, I think a lot of what I end up doing, whilst it is ostensibly SEO and it's typically from the SEO budget and objectives, a lot of it just ends up being web standards. It's this HTTP header should behave in this way in this scenario, and your caching rules aren't properly configured, and there's this security bug if users do this thing in this way, which I'm finding through search. I'm looking at what is Google crawling and indexing and how are they responding, and then going, okay, it turns out there's bigger pictures here. But it does mean a lot of what might be classed as technical SEO actually just ends up being, how do you build and maintain a good, solid, reliable, performant website? And yes, you get SEO benefits as a side effect of that, but it's not really an SEO thing.
I'm looking at the timing, and it's already almost 1 hour. And
Wow.
I mean, time flies when we talk about things that we like. And I would surely continue, but I don't know if our public would be. Maybe
One will be skeletal.
let's promise something to ourselves, and let's say we will have a second conversation with Jono in the
That'd be
future.
nice.
But before closing, as I do also with as I did with all the guests, just a very quick fire question. How about things that you like, that you dislike, so to know you deeper and know you better as the Jono person, the one
Nice.
that you can know chatting while drinking a beer. So I'm putting just you. So it's going to be something like this. It's not like an FBI interrogation, but so let's start. What is the thing that made you decide to be an SEO? So let's start with still SEO. What things made you decide to be an SEO and not, for instance, something else?
Ooh, I was a bedroom web developer building small websites for butchers and bakers, and I got obsessed with what does perfect look like. And this was before technical SEO was really famous, before there were any rules. And I spent a lot of time going, should it be like this or like that? And I became really focused on the idea that actually minute, granular attention to detail and a desire to chase perfection is hugely valuable in a world where conventional wisdom says don't chase perfection. So nobody does. So everybody's website is garbage. So if you just chase perfection a little bit, knowing you might not get there and aiming for best, yeah, you end up worlds ahead of everyone else. That's pretty cool.
And if you are honest enough to tell us, what do you think is one defect Jono Alderson has, what would be?
Oh, I won't settle for anything less than perfection. I think I get frustrated by mediocrity and even just the average, right? And I understand that businesses and people have constraints and budgets and priorities, but I think we've created a weird ecosystem where if you walked into a physical retail store and it was on fire and there were trailing electrical cables and it was flooded and the products were hard to find, you would have a visceral reaction to it. Yet that's very much the state of the web. And we've normalized the fact that 404s are okay and that it's perfectly fine to wait 8 seconds for a page to load. It's the same thing. And that makes me deeply frustrated, very, very annoyed with the fact that we normalize that and make it okay. And I have a continual battle to not just scream at the world that we should be better and we should be trying harder. And I know that's hard and it's a simplistic, narrow view, but it is frustrating that it is all so broken.
And what is the things that Jono likes to do when he's not in front of a PC?
I'm always in front of a PC. I read a lot of sci-fi. I play a lot of games also on my PC. I watch a lot of sci-fi movies and stuff. Travel a lot, a little less recently. As you all know, we used to spend a lot of time on pretty much the same flights to pretty much the same conferences. I like to see the world. I like the old world. I like the architecture and places with stories and eating interesting food in weird places and spending time with friends and lovely views.
And last question. So you are a great fan of sci-fi like me. Literally, recommendation. What is the latest sci-fi novel that you loved? And you would
Oh,
suggest to others?
latest sci-fi novel that I loved. I don't know what the latest one was, but if you go to my website at jonoalderson.com, I have a recommendations page with a whole bunch of books that lists some of my kind of long-standing favorites across sci-fi and fantasy. There's a whole bunch of interesting stuff there.
Okay, Jono, it was a great pleasure to stay with you, having a really deep and
Yeah,
fast
super.
conversation. Once again, for you, all my friends, remember to, it's just a little gesture, just fast click and subscribe, and we will have a wonderful growth thanks to you. Thank you, Jono.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been an absolute treat.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.